This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. Bruchim Abam, the first Shiur after Shavuos. So the Torah tells us in this week's Parsha we have the mitzvah of Birchas Kohanim. Daber el Aaron ve'el banav le'mar, speak to Aaron and his son, saying, Koi sevarchu es b'nei Yisrael, so shall you bless the Jewish people. Amar lohem, say to them. Last year, we spoke about the mitzvah aseh that's incumbent upon the Yisraelim to prepare themselves and allow themselves to be part of the bracha. The first bir halacha in Siman Kuf Chav Ches, Hachas Birchas Kohanim, is that it's a mitzvah on the Yisraelim to join in the Birchas Kohanim, and they're also part of the mitzvah d'oraisa. In fact, we said we brought a tshuva from Moshe, then answering amen to the Birchas Kohanim, not the bracha the Kohanim make on the Birchas Kohanim, but to the Yivarechecha, the Yair, and the Yisa. It's an aseh d'oraisa to say amen, and you could even be mafsik at certain times that ordinarily you would not be allowed to be mafsik. Okay, so last year we spoke about the Yisraelim. Today we're going to talk about the Kohanim, and then a little bit, and then back to the Yisraelim. The Gemara in Ksubis has a shaila, whether if you see a Kohen duchen, does that demonstrate that he has good yichus? After all, would the Kohen have the audacity to take off his shoes publicly and get up there in front of B'fnei Kolam Ve'ida, lift up his arms, lift up his hands in that position, and duchen, can we take that as a raya that he's of kosher yichus? So the Gemara has a shaila whether eating truma is an indication that a person has a kosher yichus, and then the Gemara wants to know what about duchening. And the Gemara says, just because eating truma would indicate that somebody has good yichus, not necessarily does duchening mean a person has good yichus, because worst comes to worst, even if he's not a kohen, there's no chiyuv misa for duchening. It's not like a zar who does avodah who's chayiv misa. Says the Gemara, the isser aseh. All a person is over if they duchen and they're not a kohen is they're over a mitzvah aseh d'oraisa. What is the aseh? Says Rashi, koi savarchu. You should bless. You priestly clan should bless, but a Yisrael should not bless. We darshan atem v'loy zarim. You and not foreigners. V'lav haba miklal aseh aseh. A lav which is inferred from an aseh has the status of an aseh. Yeah, a lav that comes from an aseh is an aseh.
Why doesn't it say Koi Savar Chem?
Koi Savar Chem?
Yeah, if he's talking to all the Kahanim, it should say Koi Savar Chem as b'nei.
Because Hashem is talking to Moshe, and he's telling Moshe, tell Aaron, Koi Savar Chem, this is they, meaning Hashem is not addressing the Kohanim directly. Hashem is talking to Moshe to tell the Kohanim. Okay, be it as it may, the Ramah brings this down and codifies this as halacha. The Ramah says, Ve'ein lazar lisa kapav, a zar shanat duchen, afilu im kohanim acherim, even if he's not the only one duchening. Why? Based on the Gemara in Ksubis, on Daf Chavdal and Beis, the zar over ba'aseh. A zar who duchens is over an aseh. What aseh? The aseh of koi savarchu. Okay. Comes the Bach, and the Bach says something very interesting. And this is something that the Tartamima derives just from the name of it. We know the name of the mitzvah that the Kohanim do is Nesias Kapayim, lifting up their hands. Why is the mitzvah called Nesias Kapayim? 3 sheets you have. Nesias Kapayim. Why do we call it Nesias Kapayim? Says the Bach, in his opinion, a zar is only over an aseh if he lifts up his hands. And if he doesn't lift up his hands, if he just goes up, he takes off his shoes, and he stands on the mat, and he goes up by Ritzeh, and he does everything he needs to do, but he doesn't lift up his hands, he's not over an aseh if he doesn't do Nesias Kapayim. So nobody knows Vas Titzach under the talis over there. Everybody has the talis Iberin cup anyway, we hope. And if a zar goes up and he duchens without Nesias Kapayim, says the Bach, you're not over an aseh. So according to the Bach, lifting up your hands is a critical part of the mitzvah. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah continues. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, the bracha is not a critical part of duchening, meaning the bracha is not ma'akev. If you don't make a bracha, it's not ma'akev. Fine. Then, the Mishnah Berurah says like this. That this halacha, that if a zar duchens, and he's not a kohen, that he's over mitzvah saseh d'oraisa, that's only if he's mechavein to be mekayim the mitzvah. So then we say, why are you being mekayim the mitzvah? You're not a kohen, you're a zar. How do you have a right to do this? So says the Magen Giborim, if you're mechavein, if you're Yisrael, and you're mechavein to be mekayim the mitzvah, then you get you're over an aseh. However, if you're not mechavein to be mekayim the mitzvah, then you do not get the Isser Da'iraisa of Kois Varchos. So again, says the Magen Giborim, it's only the din of Atem V'loi Zarim is only if you're mechavein to mekayim the mitzvah. Without kavana, then it's not a problem. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this is only true based on what we paskin in Siman Samach, mitzvah strichas kavana. If you hold mitzvah strichas kavana, so then if you're not mechavein, you're not mekayim a mitzvah, so the Yisrael is not doing anything wrong because he didn't do the mitzvah that the kohen has to do because he wasn't mechavein. But if he would be mechavein, he would be in hot water because only a kohen is allowed to duchen. But says the Mishnah Berurah, this saving grace, that if you're not mechavein, you're not a zar is not over the asay, is light the shita, is according to the shita that mitzvos need kavana. But says the Mishnah Berurah, according to the shita and Siman Samach, mitzvos do not need kavana. Then even if the Yisrael is not mechavein to be mekayim the mitzvah of koisavarchu, he's over an asay because he's doing the mitzvah anyway, because mitzvahs don't need kavana. I'm sure everybody remembers. It's a basic of Judaism. Siman Samach in Shulchan Aruch Sif Daled. Yesh oimrim mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavana. V'yesh oimrim mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. V'chein halacha. That we pass in mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. Yeah? That's the Mechaber brings down both deos, and he says v'chein halacha, that mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. There's a shaila about the Rabbanans, but by the Iraisos, we hold mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. Says the Mishnah Berurah, this asay d'oraisa that the Magen Giborim says, you're only over if you're mechavein, is according to the shitos that mitzvahs need kavana. But if you hold mitzvahs do not need kavana, then the Yisrael is going to be over the asay, even if he's not mechavein. Okay. So comes the bir halacha, is the seminal bir halacha.
You say Shem Yichud before, is that it?
No, what does L'Shem Yichud have to do with it? The Nabi says not to say L'Shem Yichud. What?
That's what gives the kavanah.
No, that's not what gives the kavanah. The Ritva says that you don't. The bracha gives the kavanah. That's why the Ritva is masha. You don't say l'shem yichud.
There are people that say preparation is even more important than the mitzvah itself.
Lahalacha, you don't have to say l'shem yichud. Kavanah refers to what's kavanah. Kavanah is in your head, not what you don't need. There's no halachic opinion that you must enunciate the kavanah. The kavanah l'chayra is fulfilled by making a bracha. Okay, so that's the shita of the Mishnah Berurah, that you're only in trouble, in other words, you're okay in the Mandamar mitzvah strichos kavana because if you don't have kavana, you're not being mekayim the mitzvah. But if mitzvah ain't strichos kavana, then a Yisrael who gives berachas kohanim is up the creek without a paddle. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? Comes the bir halacha, and the bir halacha says l'chayra we should be matmiya on the minhag ha'olam. There are many Jews out there that they bless their friends. Yivarechecha Hashem yishmerecha, Yar Hashem b'nei melecha v'chonach Yisa. And many people bless their children, and many people bless others. People go get a bracha every Yom Kippur. What bracha do you get? Yivarechecha. Frak the bir halacha. Whoever's giving this bracha is over a mitzvah saseh d'oraisa of only a kohen could give berachas kohanim and not a Yisrael. So maybe you'll say, no, it's not a problem, because berachas kohanim is only during tefillah, right? And the person who's giving a bracha is not giving a bracha in the context of tefillah. Says bir halacha, no. There's no d'oraisa that berachas kohanim is dafka during tefillah. It's only the Rabbanan were masakein that berachas kohanim is during tefillah. But there are many shitas that tefillah itself is only, there are 3 sheets. Send it out. There are many shitas that tefillah itself is only midrabanan. So, but on a daraisa level, berachas kohanim is not connected to tefillah. If that's the case, how can an average Joe administer the yivarechecha l'chayra their over a mitzvah saseh daraisa of kaisavarchu es b'nei Yisrael? What? So there, it's clear. What you're saying is We're saying what the Kohanim say. We're saying what the Kohanim say. So clearly, we're not giving the bracha, we're just invoking what the Kohanim say. But when a father tells his child, Yivarechecha, he's usurping, he's stealing, he's co-opting the bracha of the Kohanim. That's
for the tzibur versus a yachid. The mitzvah on the clan is kaisvar el esbnei Yisrael.
L'chayra, even a minyan is also not needed. Berachas Kohanim is not a davar shebekdusha. L'chayra, it's not. We don't need a minyan for it, only because it was enacted that way. But I don't know if inherently it's considered davar shebekdusha. We say en davar shebekdusha pachas me'asara. If that's the case, any kohen is allowed to give berachas kohanim, even if he doesn't, even if there's no minyan. I could go over to a kohen and ask him for berachas kohanim. So if that's the case, then how could Yisrael give berachas kohanim? L'chayra it's kaisavarch. Oh, says the Bir Halacha is a raya from the minhag ha'olam mitzvah is tricha is kavana. And therefore, when a person gives his kid berachas kohanim, he's not mechavein to mekayim the mitzvah of kaisavarchu. But we says the Bir Halacha l'chayra we see from minhag ha'olam mitzvah is tricha is kavana. Because if mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana, then all these blessings that people administer, like, is going out of style, it would be of isser dairaisa of kaisavarchas. It says, a raya brura mitzvahs tzrichas kavana. So the Bir Halacha gives two knockoffs. Says the Bir Halacha, really, I'll tell you, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavana. How do people bless their children, bless their constituents, bless whoever they want to bless? How's that possible? Answer number one, because of the bach, that you're only mekayim the mitzvah berachas kohanim if you spread out your hands. If you don't spread out your hands, you're not doing anything. Therefore, when a regular person gives the yivarechecha, he's not doing it with his hands spread out. He ties his hands behind his back. He makes sure not to stick out his hands, and therefore he's not over a daraisa of kaisavarchu esbnei Yisrael. Which would lead us to the problem, well, what if somebody does give somebody a bracha, b'frisas yadayim? Then l'chayra, according to the first answer of the Bir Halacha, they would be over a dairaisa of kaisavarchu esbnei Yisrael.
That's why the Quran says you use only one hand.
You heard this already, or? No? All right. Well, you read further.
Not here, right?
Oh, you once read?
Yes.
All right, because if you would have read further, that would have been,
Fingers on the
what? The fingers. Fingers are not ma'akev. Fingers are not ma'akev. Okay, so that's the first answer of Bir Halacha. The second answer of the Bir Halacha is that once the rabbi said berachas kohanim is in tefillah, when a person doesn't do it during tefillah, it's like explicit kavanah not to be mekayim the mitzvah. Okay? So those are the two answers. Answer number one is the reason why you could bless with yivarechecha is because you don't do it b'frisas yadayim. And answer number two is that since normally berachas kohanim is in tefillah, if you don't do it in tefillah, it's like you're mechavein befeirosh not to be yotzei the mitzvah. So which leads us to the following question, and that is, what about the minhag ha'olam that many Jews do? Sfardim do it. Jews of German descent, Yakis do it. They bless their children Friday night. Yeah? You do it? Hungarians? I can't answer for Hungarians, okay? But a lot of people do it. A lot of Jewish people do it. And first of all, the Tartmima points out that why is the mitzvah called Nasias Kapayim? So he says, like the Bach, it's a raya that a critical part of the mitzvah is spreading out one's hands. If you don't spread out one's hands, it's not that you weren't mekayim the mitzvah b'hidura, you weren't mekayim the mitzvah. But the question is, what do people do who, on a Friday night, when they come home from shul, they stretch out their hands, they put it on the head of their children, and they give a bracha b'nasias kapayim. L'chayra, that should be problematic. If, especially in light of what we just saw in the Bir Halacha, that the only reason why it's not an isser dairaisa for somebody to give their kid berachas kohanim, or somebody else is because it's not b'frisas yadayim. Well, what do we do if we do it b'frisas yadayim? So I would answer that question very simply. Nobody does berachas kohanim b'nasias kapayim. I have never seen Friday night somebody raise up their hands and bless the way Kohanim bless. They put their hands on the head. I have also yet to see a Kohen during Birchas Kohanim. I'm under my talis. All of a sudden I feel someone's hands on my head. I would get a little scared, That would be a little jarring, All of a sudden, I'm standing over here with somebody's hands on. So maybe there isn't. Maybe the fact that we don't do it the way the Kohanim do it, b'nesiyas kapayim, but rather we do it b'frisas yadayim, on the head, like smicha. Maybe that's also a way of showing that we're not mechabein to be mekayim the mitzvah the way the Kohanim do it. But the Torah Tamima doesn't like that. And the Torah Tamima says, let me tell you a story. And this story is what Mr. Itzkowitz pointed out, that he said he heard from the Gra. I don't know if you heard it personally, straight from the Gra, but somewhere in between, that there was a chasana. What? Rabbi Itzkowitz? Okay. Good to know. What? A lot of people know a lot of information about you over here. Yeah. So there was somebody in the times of the Gra who was getting married. He was none other than Rabbi Cheskel Landau, the Noid Yehuda. And at the chasna of the Noid Yehuda, they definitely did not say L'Shem Yehuda, they invited the Vilna Gaon, and the Vilna Gaon went over to Rabbi Cheskel Landau, and he placed one hand on Rabbi Cheskel Landau's head, and he gave him a bracha. And they asked him, "Nu, Gra, why are you doing this?" Says the Gra, because we don't find two hands only by the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash. Says the Baal Torah Tamim, the Torah Tamim was the son of the Aruch HaShulchan. I never saw anybody point out that this is the correct way to do it. And in fact, if you give someone a bracha, you really are not allowed to use two hands. This is a ha'ara nefla. And says the Torah Tamim, it's important to know. Now, v'heinif yadoi shenis, that means he points this out again in another sefer of his, in the Tosefes Bracha, where the Baal Torah Tamima says that they asked the Gra, because we know every ma'isa of the Gra was medukduk al pi halacha. The Gra did not breathe unless it was al pi halacha. There was one particular time, it's brought down in the Hakdama of the Bira HaGra, the Gra was invited to somebody's house, and he would eat the food that they were serving him, and he would eat it, and vomit it, and then eat it again, and vomit. And they asked him, what are you doing? He says, because Chazal say, Kol ma she'amar l'cha Baal Habayis aseh, chutz mitzeh. That if the Baal Habayis says to do something, you have to do it. And he was telling me to eat, so I was mechuyev just to keep on eating it, even though it was rancid. So every ma'isa of the Gra was a medukduk al pi halacha. They asked the Gra, why did you only put one hand on the person's head? And he said, because we don't find Birchas Kohanim by two hands, only the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash. So it says the Baal Torah Tamima, l'chayra, what the Gra meant was that if you use two hands, you're over d'oraisa of Kosev Orchel B'nai Yisrael. And I can't believe it. There are many Chasidim, Tzadikim, Gaonim. They're not makbid to the Torah Tamima, and they're not doing the right thing. Really, everybody should be aware that if you're using the Lashon of Yivarechecha, you're only allowed to use one hand. This is the story brought in the Torah Tamima about the Vilna Gaon. As you know, a story is just a story. What's the makar of the story? Does anybody else bring down the story? Where does this come from? What does the Gra himself say?
Does the Gra say mitzvahs tzrichos kavanah?
What is the Gra paskin? In Siman Samach?
We wouldn't have a problem.
If you paskin mitzvahs tzrichos, you're right. In a chanami. We paskin mitzvahs tzrichos kavanah, so it's not another problem. That's a very good point. We take a paskin mitzvahs tzrichos kavanah, and it's not real an issue. So according to us, you could use two hands, but the Gra was makbid to use one hand. Interestingly, Rav Yaakov Emden disagrees. Rav Yaakov Emden says that when you bless your children, you need to use two hands. Why do you have to use two hands? Well, first of all, the question is, who is supposed to be giving out brachas on Shabbos? So one thing I want to bring to your attention is, if you don't have this custom of blessing children, you're saying that it's a Yeki custom, it's a Svardik custom, it's none of the above. It's a legitimate Jewish custom. Why? Where does it come from? Why Friday night? Rav Yaakov Emden says, first of all, two people have to give brachas. Rav Yaakov Emden says parents should give their children brachas, and the Rabbanim should give their kehila brachas. We'll see. No promises, okay? But that's what Rav Yaakov Emden says. When should you give the bracha? After davening. Now, that means Friday night. Why? So Yaakov says a very interesting thing. Friday night after davening, the shefa of bracha comes down min hashamayim. Shabbos is makar habracha. That's when the shefa comes down. He says one of the most interesting things I've heard in a while. In order to connect to shefa, you need two things. You need a shefa puller, and you need a shefa recipient. Of course, right? You think it's obvious. Yeah, I also thought so. In order to get shefa, you need something that could pull shefa, and you need something that could contain shefa. In order to pull shefa, you need ma'asim tovim. A katan has no ma'asim tovim, has no mitzvahs. A katan, but a gadol has ma'asim tovim, mitzvahs. So a gadol could be the shefa puller. But the gadol is not really a kli to hold shefa. Who could be makabel the shefa? Who could be makabel the shefa? Only a katan. Why only a katan? Because a katan has no avoinos. So basically, al yedei the emtsoi of the gadol, he pulls down the shefa, and he sends it to the ketanim, and once it hits the ketanim fill up with the bracha, and from them it's mispashet yoser. Says Rabbi Yaakov, you could give to adult kids also, but the ikar kli hamakabel is banav haktanim. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, put two hands on their head. Says Rabbi Yaakov, I'll bring you three proofs. You should put two hands on the head. Proof number one, every time in Tanakh, somebody gives a bracha, they use two hands. Remember by Moshe and Yehoshua, Hashem says to Moshe, V'samach yadcha alav, put your hand on him. And the Gemara says Moshe did it by ayin yafeh. Moshe put two hands on Yeshua's head. So from there we say, we learn out, toiv ayin hu yavarech, you should give a bracha with two hands. If you give one hand, you're being stingy. Aha, very good. We're going to get to that. Whenever you give bracha, you should be generous. Whenever you give anything, you should be generous. Don't be a stingy guy. It's a good midah to be generous. You know, you're sending your kid, it's Chanukah, so you're sending the Rebbe a tip. Yeah? What does it cost you to give a little bit more? Be generous, be extra. First of all, the Gemara says something very interesting, that the Gemara says that somebody's life was saved because when he would pay for something, he wouldn't ask for his change back. Why? Achav would not ask for his change back. What's the big midah of not asking for your change back? The Sefer Chinuch writes that when a person demonstrates generosity, it's not that Hashem has to come and give the person a bracha. They're already immediately encircled in bracha at that moment. In other words, the midah of nedivos, the midah of generosity, is a midah which automatically envelops the person in bracha. So when you're giving a bracha, why be stingy? Why use one hand? Use two hands. Be generous about it. Number two, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Birchas Kayanim is two hands. So some of the Achroinim ask, the Pardes Tzvi in number 15 asks, exactly! If Birchas Kayanim is two hands, so when you give your friend a bracha, it should only be with one hand. Apparently Rabbi Yaakov Emden doesn't go that way. Yeah, what's the difference? We see from Birchas Kayanim, a bracha is with two hands, so when you give your friend a bracha, you should do it with two hands. Number three, the Gemara says in Shabbos, look at number 10, the Gemara says anyone who davens Friday night and says Vayechulu, the two malachei ashares that accompany a person, they place their hands on his head and they say all your sins are forgiven. The lashon of the Gemara is yedehem, their hands. So it's mashma that when you give a bracha, you should use two hands.
Not yedehem, maybe the two malachim put their hand, which is four. So maybe they put one and one.
Ah, very good. So the Megadim Chadash. So when I was in Eretz Yisrael early in this year, I was zoicha to. I have a sefer, a very interesting sefer. It's called Megadim Chadashim. I have it on Bereshis, Bamidbar, Devarim, Masechta Brachos, Masechta Moed Katan, and I really enjoyed the sefer. I didn't know who the Mechaber. It says David Yoel Weiss, Shmuel Hanavi. So in Eretz Yisrael, that was a good opportunity. You want to meet these Mechabrim. Who are these people? So I went to Shmuel, and I remember on a Friday morning, I climbed up like 6 flights of stairs. I knocked on his door. Wasn't home. 12 o'clock, we went to the Meir, we went back, we knocked on his door, he wasn't home. I said, no, I'm not going home until he answers his door. So we came back maybe an hour later, he answered the door, Mamish, Mitzadike Yerushalayim, Miyakira Yerushalayim. Empty apartment, just Sfarim, like real old-time Yerushalmi. This sefer is a sefer, tremendous bekiyas, going back 30, 40 years already. It's a famous sefer. So he asked, what Reb Sender is pointing out, just because the Gemara says Yedei Hen means hands. Yeah, hands. Because they're two malachim. Each one puts their hand, right? That's the question of the Parshas, excuse me, number 15. Maybe each malach puts their hand on the person, but we don't know each one puts their hands on the person. So the Megadim Chadashim says no. If it was going to say that each one put their hand on the person, it would say, Manicham Yadam, their hand. Plural people, in Yedehen is mashma, plural, 2 and 2.
When they put on 4 hands, is that what it is?
Yeah, 4 hands. You don't feel it?
I only felt 2.
You only felt 2. All right, we'll talk. We'll explain why that was. Okay, but anyway, so that's Rabbi Yaakov Emden brings a raya that when it comes to blessing, we see from the Malach Yashas, they use 2 hands. So I would say that's not a problem. It's Malach doesn't have to keep the Torah. The Kaisavarchu v'loy zarim is not v'loy malachim. Malachim are not mitzuveh. But anyway, so now you're probably wondering, so Dodi wanted to know, well, wait a second. You always give a bracha with 2 hands. We know Yaakov Avinu. He took his right hand, he put it on Ephraim, and he took his left hand, and he put it on Menashe. So we see that you could give a bracha with 1 hand. And the fact, very interesting, if you look in the Nefesh Kol Chai, number 14, Reb Chaim Falaji, he slugs up Rabbi Yaakov Emden based on this kasha. How could you say, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, that you always give bracha with 2 hands? What about Yaakov Avinu, gave 1 hand? And he dismisses Rabbi Yaakov Emden because of that. Now, he didn't see this piece of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rabbi Yaakov Emden himself asked the question. We actually, at the end of his life, it doesn't even say he used his hands, because he had the 12 shvatim sitting around. But says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, think about what's happening over here. Menashe and Ephraim, they came to him simultaneously. So what did he do? He has a dilemma. He wants to give Ephraim the main bracha, because he knows Gidon's going to come out of Menashe. He knows Yeravim's going to come out of Menashe. But Menashe is the Bechar. So he gives the Menashe the right spot. He gives Ephraim the right hand. So you'll say, why didn't he give each one 2 hands, like you're supposed to? Says Can you imagine? Even when he just gave Ephraim the right hand, Yosef was makbid. Yosef said, look, he's the oldest. You're going to cause sibling rivalry. You can't show favoritism. Yosef himself understood the dangers of showing favoritism to one sibling. You can't put your right hand on Ephraim. Can you imagine what kind of fuss Yosef would have made if he took 2 hands and he put on Ephraim and then 2 hands on Menashe? Yosef would have been very, very upset. So under the circumstances, says Yaakov, and then Yaakov Avinu had no alternative other than to put 1 hand on Ephraim and 1 hand on Menashe. But regularly, when you give a bracha, says Yaakov Emden, you should use 2 hands. So you have an amazing machlokes. When you bless your children on Friday night, should you use 1 hand only, like the Tartamima says the Gro is makbid, or should you use 2 hands as the Rabbi Yaakov Emden points out? Okay, very interesting. So I'm going to show you now a whole bunch of sources of what is preferable. Should you use 1 hand or should you use 2 hands? Let's skip for a moment to number 17. So, in the Sefer Or HaYashar of one of the great Mekubam, Rabbi Meir Paparish, he says, "B'voyoy lebeisa." When you get home, yoymar b'koram, say out loud, "Shabbos shalom." V'yenashek yedei imoy. You should kiss your mother's hand. It's well known, al pi Kabbalah, that the Arizal was very makbid to kiss his mother's hand. He said he reached very high madregos by kissing his mother's hand. By the way, now this is going to open a can of worms. All the Sfardim do that. A lot of people do that. Someone in the back does it, or what? Yeah? He's not admitting. What? Okay, so Arizal says to kiss your mother's hand. In the original Girsa of the Ar Hayashar, Rabbi Meir Paprish, he says, V'yanashik yidei imoi v'chamoisoi. Kiss your mother's hand and your mother-in-law's hand. That itself requires an entire shiur, okay? Okay. Bottom halacha l'maisa, you know how to do it, okay? But that's a major subject. What does he mean? Does he really mean that? But v'yesh b'isod, it has a secret. First, okay, he says like this. First, you kiss the hand that blesses you, and then the mavarich puts his right hand on you to bless you. Bottom line is, how many hands does Rabbi Meir Paprish say you should use when you give a bracha? One hand. So that's like the Vilna Gaon. Now let me tell you another thing. Recently, people have been coming to my grandfather's Gesundsein to get brachas. People coming from all over the place. People drove, when he was in Pittsburgh, people drove from Williamsburg to Pittsburgh. Now he's in Brooklyn. So he has a thing, when he gives a bracha, he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekar HaBracha, and then he gives the bracha. And then I see the Chidah says, from the Zohar, that before you give a bracha, you're mechuyev to give a bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if you don't give a bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your bracha doesn't do anything. That's what the Chidah brings down. Chidah says, in the Dvash number 18, if you want to give your friend a bracha or your son, first you have to bless Hashem. If you don't, it's not going to be fulfilled. Interesting. So it could be, when Kohanim give the brachas Kohanim, they do say a bracha. Now they're not doing it for that, but once they're doing it, they're doing that. And then the Chidah says something very interesting. He quotes a Gaon from Padua. The last time I heard this Gaon was 2 years ago. The name of this Gaon is Rabbi Yaakov Chazak. Rabbi Yaakov Chazak, when somebody came to get a bracha, he would put one hand on his head. He would say, Yizbarach Shemoi Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then he would give a bracha. So Stam, if you came here tonight just to learn that before you give a bracha to your children, to anybody, first you have to be Yizbarach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then you could give a bracha. It's interesting, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in the Mikroi Kodesh, he says that when you eat the simonim, Leil Rosh Hashanah, right? So, what do you do first? Do you make the Yiratzon first? Do you make the bracha first? So he says, no, first you make the bracha. You make holiest. Then you eat a little bit. And only then you could say Yiratzon. Because before you pray, you need to bless Hashem for the same reason. And that's why he says, and nobody's going to like this, what are you going to do? That before, you're not allowed to say L'chaim until first you make a bracha on the mashke, and then you could give a bracha L'chaim. First you make Vod Priyat Gofen, Shakal Niyah B'dvaroi. Of course you're not making Kiddush on that, because you can only make it on wine, but that's a different story. First you make Vod Priyat Gofen, then or Shahakal, then you drink, and only then could you say L'chaim, Paskins, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank. Otherwise, to say L'chaim first, you're violating this halacha of giving a bracha before you mavarech HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's brought down in the Mikroi Kodesh on Rosh Hashanah. Okay.
Two children, can you put one hand on each head, one hand on each one, and give a blessing?
You want to know if you have two children, should you do what Yaakov did?
Yaakov did it.
The problem is using the left hand.
Meaning you have Ruach HaKodesh, so you know that the younger one is going to be better than the older one. We have a lot to talk about, okay? So, I guess if the scenario of Yaakov Avinu repeats itself, then you could do what he did. Okay, now we have to see the minhag of the Munkacher, right? Every shiur we always make sure to say what the Munkacher would do. So in the Sefer Darkei Chaim V'Shalom, he brings down the Minchas Alozar.
No, Darkei Chaim V'Shalom is not the Minchas Alozar. That's his father.
No, I think it's him. It says over here, yeah?
Darkei Chaim V'Shalom is his father.
Minchas Alozar's father? No, I think it's him. That on Erev Yom Kippur, people would line up to get a bracha from him, and if too many people would come, he would apologize. I can't give everybody a separate bracha. But bottom line is, he would put his right hand on the head of the Mizbarech, and he would only use one hand, like the Vilna Gaon, and like the Rabbi Meir Papirish that we said before. So Rabbi said, even though Rabbi Yaakov Emden was very adamant that you should only use that you should use two hands, we've seen many Mekayros. We have a story of the Vilna Gaon used one hand, and the Sefer or Hayashar, and the Chida also is mashna one hand, and here we have the Munkatcher would also use one hand. By the way, the Chida, the Rabbi Yaakov Emden says that not like those who are chasar das and only use one hand. Who is he talking about? I mean, who's the Rabbi Yaakov Emden talking? Now, Rabbi Yaakov Emden never disappoints us. Rabbi Yaakov Emden doesn't just say a shita. He says a shita. He says if you use one hand, you're chasar das. And who's he referring to? So there's a tshuva of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. What were the tshuvas of Rabbi Yaakov Emden? The Shelas Yavitz. In the Shelas Yavitz, we jumped over it. In number 12, the Shelas Yavitz quotes none other than the Chemdas Hayamim. We have many shiurim on the Chemdas Hayamim, and we know Rabbi Yaakov Emden's shita was that the Chemdas Hayamim was written by Nathan of Gaza, the prophet of Shabtai Tzvi. He makes it a point that you're only supposed to use one hand, and Rabbi Yaakov Emden has choice words. He says, those who use one hand, they are missing das. Okay. Pachad Yitzchak, look at number 20. What?
What is the concept of putting a hand on Yaakov?
Where do we see it from?
Just from Moshe, what is it?
We see Moshe did it to Yeshua. We're going to see Aaron HaKohen also did it when he blessed Kal Yisrael. Berchas Koyanim. We learn it from Berchas Koyanim.
No, it's on top of the head.
You don't put any hands on
It's top of the head.
No, so you're right. So by Moshe Rabbeinu, put it on the head of Yeshua.
Yaakov did it.
Yaakov did it, right? Okay. The Pachad Yitzchak, not Rav Hutner, the original Pachad Yitzchak, the Rav Yitzchak Lamprunti of Ferrara, he brings down that there are people who are makbid only to use one hand. Why? Because they don't want to use the left hand. The left hand is Midas Hadin. But he says, my opinion is as follows. It depends if you're married or not. If a guy is married, so one is for him, he gets two hands, one for him and one for his wife. If the guy is single, he only gets one hand. But a bacher learning in yeshiva, he also has a wife. Who's his wife? The Torah. So therefore he also gets two hands. Also, the chachamim need to give a bracha to the kahal with two hands. Ibo yisei makra, ibo yisei masvara. The pasuk is, Vayisa Aaron es yadav el ha'am vayivarchem. You always want to be koilel, the right and the left together. Like when we daven Shemona Esrei, al pi kabbalah, you fold the left hand and the right hand. Here's where it gets quite interesting. The pasuk that he quotes that you should use two hands is Vayisa Aaron es yadav vayivarchem. Anybody remember that pasuk? Look at number 23. Vayisa Aaron es yadav el ha'am. The pasuk yadav, it's a Greek sieve. It says, Vayisa Aaron es yadai, he lifted up his hand, but it's spelled yadai, and it's read yadav. It's spelled his hand, and it's read yadav. So says Rav Chaim Falaji, that the Pachad Yitzchak reads the pasuk, when a guy is single, it's yadai. When the guy is married, it's yadav. That's why it's a Greek sieve. But says Rav Chaim Falaji, he would be inclined to read it a little bit differently. He would be inclined to say that Yadav is Aaron HaKohen could use two hands, but a regular Yisrael is only allowed to use one hand. And the truth is, the Zohar says a completely different pshat. So we have, how many Kohanim do we have here today? How many Kohanim? 3? 3 Kohanim looks like, yeah? 3 Kohanim. The Zohar has a different pshat, and this is halach l'maisa. The Zohar says, why does it say yadai and it's read yadav? It says the Zohar, look at number 24, Ta'ana Amar Rav Yitzchak, Koyin boy lezakfa yamina al smala. The right hand must be higher than the left hand. Why? It says yadai. It doesn't say yadav. Why? Vayisa Aaron es yadav, yadai ksiv lo yadav. You need the right hand to be a little higher. And we paskin like this in Shulchan Aruch, l'halacha, that the right hand of the kohen must be higher than the left hand. So it's all, in a way, it's really one hand. One hand is given supremacy. The right hand is higher than the left hand. So it's kedai to come here just to chazer over that halacha. That if you're a kohen, or you're a striving kohen, a yearning kohen, someone who has ambition to be a kohen one day, you should remember that your right hand should be higher than the left hand. Now,
Didn't wash his hands. Didn't take off his shoes.
chayra.
What's the question?
Could a kohen give birchas kohanim b'nasiyas kapayim at a different venue? In a different venue. Yeah. Mm. Okay. Let's see a few more Amar Mekaymes.
They say by bris you go to the Sunday because of Rosh. Where does that come from? Why Sunday?
They say a lot of things. There are a lot of things that they say. One day we're going to give a shiur about the they. The they.
Who they are, yeah.
You know? Who are the they? Fine. What? Okay, let's try to wrap things up. So the Reishis Chachma writes, very interesting thing, that there's a chiyuv that when to train your children to kiss the hands of their father, mother, and Rebbe, and that the Sfardim do, right? And anyone who kisses, who the katan kisses their hand, must put their hand on their head and give them a bracha. But says the Reishis Chachma an interesting thing. Placing your hand on someone's head itself is a bracha. Why is it a bracha? It says something very interesting. How many joints are in the hand? You have 3 in the pinky. You have 3 in the next, 3 in the next, 3 in the next, 2 in the thumb. That's 14. Plus the hand itself is 15. The hand is 15 parts. Keneged the 15 words of Birchas Kohanim. Yivrach Hashem, Yishmecha, Yar Hashem, Panav Eilach, V'choneka, Yisa Hashem, Panav Eilach, V'yasim Lecha, Shalom. The hand itself is the physical manifestation of Birchas Kohanim. If you merely place your hand on someone's head, says the Reishis Chachma, that alone is a bracha. And once you do it, you should also give a bracha. By the way, Rabbeinu Ephraim Arishon says this, the Ben Ish Chai writes it, that the hand itself is a physical manifestation of Birchas Kohanim. But again, from all these Makairos, it sounds like you should use one hand only. One hand only. Let's take a look at number 30, the Yosef Oimetz, Rabbi Yosef, what?
There were 15 steps in the base of Mikdash.
There you go. Yeah, number 30, yeah? The Yosef Oimetz writes of Yosef Yosvahan that there's the minhag, the original minhag is to give your children a bracha 3 times on Shabbos. Why 3 times? When Shabbos comes in, when Shabbos morning, and when Shabbos is over. As we see, the Leket Yosher gave his whole family brachas after Havdalah. And the best time to give a bracha is after Tefillah. Because after Tefillah, a person has so much Kedusha after having been in meditation and contemplation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu for such an extended period of time, without any communication with anyone other than the Ribono Shel Olam. That's the highest madrega person reaches, and at that time there's a very great degree of shefa, and one should try to extend it to one's children. But he writes you should use 10 fingers to have all 10 spheros involved. The Kol Ramaz, Rav Moshe Zakutel, number 32, also writes you should use 2 hands. 2 hands. This way, that's the standard minhag Yisrael. What in the Sefer Yafel Alev, also Sefer Rav Chaim Falaji, he writes, what's the inyan of giving a bracha right at the beginning of Shabbos, Friday night when you come home from shul? So he says a very interesting idea. He says Rabbi Yaakov Emden and the Sefer Chemdas Hayamim both say the concept is that that's the time that the shefa comes down min hashamayim. But he would suggest another reason, that we know that Shmir Shabbos is hukash likibur avayim. Right? It says, Ish aviv v'imay tiro v'shabsoisai tishmayro. So honoring Shabbos is equal to kibbut avayim. The purpose of giving the bracha is not to give the bracha. the purpose of giving the bracha is for the child to kiss the hand of the parent, which is a mitzvah d'oraisa of kibbud av v'em. This way, you combine the mitzvah of Shmir Shabbos with kibbud av v'em. Now, once the kid kisses your hand, we saw in the Reishis Chachma, you're mechuyev to give a bracha. So the inyan of giving the bracha is just a result of trying to get in the mitzvah of kibbud av v'em. So first, the right thing to do is you train your children. You're going to have to, now in America, you're going to have to train them when they're very young. If you wake up when they're 5 years old to kiss your hand, lots of luck. It ain't happening, you know? What? You have to kiss, you'll have to train them from the time they're born.
Why is it keeping saying
Katan?
Yes, it's katan,
You train them. You're supposed to train them. Your child, yeah. Why the hand? Why the hand? What should they kiss?
Why can't they give a hug? Why do they have to be the hand?
Well, I guess the hand is the brachas kayanim. In other words, you're showing chashivos to the chefza that's going to give you the bracha. Here we have number 34, Rabbi Isai, from Rabbi Elio Kapshali, who lived in the 15th century, 1485 to 1555. He writes that... No, afterwards, yeah? Number 34. He brings that when he was in yeshiva in Padua, yeah, he was serving his rabbanim, his rabbeim Ashkenazim. He saw a very chashuv minog. Friday night after Mariv, all the children would go to their parents, bow down to them, lie down on the floor, and kiss the palms of their hands. And the father would put their hands on their heads and give them a bracha. All the children would do that, even adult children, even children who had children, even children who had grandchildren. And the inyan is that as long as you have a parent, you need to demonstrate you're under their jurisdiction. Doesn't matter how old you are. You could be 90 years old. If your parent is 117, you have to demonstrate kibbud av v'em, you're under their control. How do you do that? You're mishtateach, and they put their hand on your head. And another story. You ready for this story? And then we're going to have a really good story. I can't go back.
It says, what does it say?
Where?
31.
Number 31.
What do you mean?
So basically, back in Germany, he would cup his hand, he would put wine in his hand, and then they would drink from his hand. Is a different gersos whether the daughter-in-laws also did that or only the daughters. That's also back to the subject of the mother-in-law's hand. Let's.
That's the thing.
Why not? What's wrong with drinking wine? Oh, we're gonna.
Because she brought the original sin was brought her up by wine, and she caused it, so therefore she doesn't drink from the kosher bracha.
That's a good reason. It's a good reason. Okay, we'll have to come back to that. Let's finish this up. Yeah, Degel Machon Ephraim brings down different stories of people who came to him from the Olam HaEmes. You know, there are people who sometimes get visitors from different worlds. So the Degel Machon Ephraim, people would come to him from the Olam HaEmes, and the Rabbi Yehuda Leib Moichiach mi Polonia came to the Degel, and the Degel said, "I can't believe you're here. I'm so happy to see you. Put your two hands on me and give me a bracha." So they want to bring that as a raya, that when you give a bracha, you use two hands. Also, I don't think it's a raya. Once you're in the next world, you don't have to keep the Torah anymore. So he said, finally, I have somebody who could give me a bracha with two hands. Okay, there are a lot of different Maramakaimas. Then we have a psak of the Karen LeDavid. Shas Chuvas Karen LeDavid, who seems to take the Bir Halacha very literally, and he upholds the minhag of the Goin, and that is that a kohen is only considered being mekayim, the mitzvah of koy savarchu, if he does it in a siyas kapayim, and therefore the minhag to give your children a bracha must be only biyad achas b'loy b'shtei yadav. And he says, if you look in the Siddur of the Arizal also says, only use one hand, do not use two hands. If you look in the Siddur Hagra, in the Siddur Hagra, it says that they heard in the name of the Gra, that the Gra was makbid also only to use one hand. Now the Megadim Chadashim says, what do you mean you heard in the name of the Gra? Who told you? Yeah, he probably got it, whoever put together the Siddur probably got it from the Torah Tamima. So the Megadim Chadashim is inclined to say that it's not a problem. It's not a problem. L'chayra, you're allowed to use two hands, like we see in Rabbi Yaakov Emden, we see in many Mekayros. The story of the Gra, he's very incredulous about that story, that the Gra, in fact, was makbid only to use one hand. He doesn't feel that that the story has enough, is sourced and documented strongly enough to say that we have to follow it. And the Megadim Chadashim seems to say that it's okay and it's preferred, possibly even to use two hands. Maybe we're going to come to a different conclusion. Let me just tell you another version of the story of the Gra. There's a Sefer Maseh Ofas. So he brings down a little bit of a different version of the story of the Vilna Gaon. There was a chassan by the name of Rabbi Cheskel Landau. Now, do I believe the story? There's some details that are a little... Yeah? There was a now this is the same story that Torah Tamima brings down, but a little bit of a twist. There was a chassan named Rabbi Cheskel Landau, the Rabbi Yehuda. And the Shver wanted to take the Rabbi Yehuda on the Afruf to get a bracha from the Goin. So he took him to the Goin. The Goin was in the middle of eating kugel. Pashtida. It says pashtida. And the Goin's hands were full of schmaltz from the kugel. And the Vilna and the Rabbi Yehuda came over to get a bracha. But the thing was, so the story says, the Rabbi Yehuda was wearing a shtreimel, which is also, yeah. And the Goin about to put his two hands, and the Rabbi Yehuda, what? He moved. He's going to touch the shtreimel, and the Goin only got one hand on the shtreimel.
You wore a shtreimel before the wedding?
At the Afraf. You know, I think that's the least of the questions on this story, but it's brought down in the Sefer. So, but basically, from that bracha, the Rabbi Yehuda lived a very long life, and he attributed it to the bracha of the Goin. And the Rabbi Yehuda ad Yom Ha'achron never wore glasses. Why? Because he felt the bracha of the Goin made it that his eyesight never weakened. But his whole life, the Rabbi Yehuda sort of kicked himself. Why did he value the shtreimel over the bracha of the Vilna Gaon? So bottom line, what's the bottom line? Should you use one hand or should you use two hands?
Never wear a shtreimel when you get your bracha. That's the bottom line.
Especially not from the Vilna Gaon. You know, one thing you don't want to do is wear a shtreimel when you get a bracha from the Vilna Gaon. But here's the bottom line. I would say the bottom line is, this is an issue that is not discussed in any of the poskim. We did not bring down really one sefer of psak that gave you a definitive, we have a siddur and we have svarim. So it's an inyan. Some say use one hand, some say use two hands. If it's brought down in poskim, there's something called kolei apsak. You follow the greater poskim, you follow the roiv of the poskim. This is an inyan. So if it's an inyan, then you could follow your personal minhag, or you could follow the gedolim that you usually follow. There's not a very compelling direction. You have svaros mikan olakan. You have the svaro attributed to the Goin that if you use one hand, it's better because you're not getting into an issue of koisav archu, which b'chal we didn't understand because we pass mitzvahs tzrichas kavona. You have the svaro of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Once you're giving a bracha, use two hands. Be generous about it. One thing I would tell you is, every time you give your kid a bracha, you could chazer over this inyan, that there's an issue of violating koisav archu, so make sure you're mechave not to be mekayim the mitzvah berachos kayanim. But I think one thing we see from 41 Mar Makoimos, you have 40 different Gedolim who took very seriously the issue, the inyan of giving a bracha to one's children on Shabbos, which means that giving a bracha is probably a real force and a real kayach to be moishech a bracha and shefa min hashamayim, especially Leil Shabbos, which is a time of shefa, and that l'kulei alma loy pligi is something that is effective and is probably a good idea. So we should be zoiche that all of our brachas should be makuyim for simchas anachas abiyas kol tzedek.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.